All right, folks, it is mistake number 6 today of the 7 biggest mistakes people are making when they're starting their own business. Stick around, join me. You're going to want to hear this one.
This is the Franchise Pitfalls and Profit Show. Each week, we bring you the challenges and triumphs of being in the franchise development and consulting business. The things you need to make money faster. And now your host, one of the most successful franchise developers in North America, Don Shin.
Hey, David Letterman style, top 10 lists. Well, I had 7, and we're on number 6, tracking the biggest mistakes that I've seen people make when they're considering starting their own business. So number 6 today of the 7 is that people are beginning their funding search too late. They're taking too long to start looking for funds to start their business. Hey, if you have good credit, if you can afford to fund a business, inevitably you're going to get the funds that you need. There are some very basics that you're going to need, whether you're going to a more traditional funding source, whether you're going through SBA, which is very, very popular, particularly in franchising. And I'll give you those couple of things. In my experience, you've got to have a minimum credit score of around 700. The higher, the better. And sometimes, if you're at 680, you might be able to sneak through, but you want to shoot for a credit score of about 700 or higher. You also inevitably want to have and be able to show some liquidity. No lender is going to want to see you borrowing or trying to borrow 100% of what it's going to take to start the business. And what I know SBA looks for, and many lenders look for, somewhere between 25 and 35% of your total need. And that's, for most businesses, for probably 90% of the businesses out there that you might look at. In particular, I'm thinking in the franchise space, that means you're going to need 100 to 125,000 liquid. Most businesses, in my experience, franchises particularly, you're looking at purchasing a franchise for $75,000 to $150,000. Generally speaking, in those cases, you might not really be funding much or needing much funding. You might just need a line of credit. But if you're getting into brick and mortar businesses, you're looking at businesses typically 250 to 500,000, typically for a build out for a brick and mortar business in franchising again. And so that's where you want that 100 to 100 and a quarter, 100 to 150 liquid in order to be able to move forward. So again, the key challenge here is that people are beginning their search too late. Now, second point you want to consider is what are you actually doing here is very similar to purchasing a home. Have you purchased a home recently? If you have, it's extremely popular and probable almost all of the time nowadays is to go and get pre-approved for your mortgage. You are much more attractive as a buyer, and it helps your sales agent if they can present someone to a buyer who can afford to buy the home. Years ago, for whatever reason, people didn't do this. Years ago, you were told that this buyer has the money to be able to do this. You were told this person could go get a mortgage on the home, but once in a while, those deals fell through. So it's become a very common practice in real estate to get pre-approved for a mortgage. And fundamentally, when you start your funding search early in order to buy a business or buy a franchise, you're going to inevitably be doing that same fundamental process. You're getting pre-approved, particularly again in franchising. It's going to make you look much more attractive to a franchisor who is considering awarding you a franchise and to the franchise system that you're considering buying. Now, all I mean here by starting too late is to say that after you've already decided on the business you want to start or the franchise that you're purchasing, beginning the search at that stage, you're already probably 6 or 8 or 10 weeks into the process. What it's ultimately just going to do is delay any training that you have to go through, and it is clearly going to delay the opening of your business. Again, is that a big deal? No. But what is a delay of 6 to 8 to 10 additional weeks? Typically, to get funding, you're looking at probably 45 days to 60 days. Inevitably, you don't have some of the paperwork that the lender's requiring. So inevitably, if in a perfect world, you give your funding package, all of the information at once. And yeah, you could probably, if it's perfect, you can probably see your funds available in 4 to 5 weeks. But it's never a perfect world. There's always something going on. At times, SBA, if you're going through SBA, at times SBA has been taking longer, delaying the funding process because they're too busy. So inevitably, I always tell people to plan for 6 weeks, maybe even as long as 8 weeks before from the time you first apply to when you're actually going to see the funds available. So again, it's not a big deal ultimately, but it's just going to delay things. So what ultimately does the delay do to you? What the delay is going to do to you is potentially lose some opportunity. In franchising, you're probably not going to lose your territory if you sign your franchise agreements to hold that territory. But starting 2 months later means you're going to have a slower ramp up, or starting 2 months later just means you're not making that kind of money for a couple of extra months. It also could delay your training. Sometimes larger franchise concepts have larger franchise concepts have specific training dates and training schedules. So, wow, you're not only going to have to wait 6 to 8 weeks to actually see the funding, but you may inevitably miss a training date, which means you've got another 4 to 6 weeks on top of that because you've missed that training date. The other thing is, and very candidly, is it's a lot. This whole thing is a stressful time. It's a time filled with anxiety and some fears. You're pushing through all of those things, and adding delay simply means you're going to go through added stress. You're going to have added anxieties. Your family, your spouse who are involved in this and certainly impacted by this are going to have some of the same anxieties and fears and stress. And wow, if you don't have to do that, if you don't have to go through those added weeks of worry, did I have all the paperwork in? Am I really going to be able to get this lending? When you are, but there's still, until you get the approval letter, there's still that anxiety, there's still that fear, there's still that stress. So that's all I'm trying to share with you. I'm trying to help you get through this process in a timely fashion that's enjoyable, with a little bit of stress or a little bit of anxiety, just trying to help you manage the process better, so that you just don't have to go through all of the pain and anxieties and suffering that sometimes can happen. So have an idea of the cost of the business that you're starting, or in essence, if it's a franchise, it'll be very, very clear what you need to invest in order to buy the business and start the business. Know how much of that you want to have liquid and available. Do this prior to starting it, and then get that funding approval process started. if you never buy the business, if you never start the franchise, you just don't take the funds. There aren't even typically there aren't even any fees or application fees or anything due. So you have absolutely nothing to lose by starting your funding process early and getting pre-approved. If you do move forward, you will absolutely be glad that you had all of this in place, because then you can make good choices. You can get into the training classes sooner. You can just get this new business started quicker than if you had to then wait on funding. So I encourage you, get the funding process started faster.